Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are launching a really fascinating historical investigation into the hidden forces that bring down the world's absolute greatest civilizations. We so often think of history as just a series of random events, right? Like a chaotic timeline of things rising and falling. But what if it's not random at all? What if there is an actual readable blueprint to collapse? Every great empire believes it is eternal. Man, Rome believed it for sure. Britain believed it. The Soviet Union absolutely, literally had no doubt. And every single one of them was entirely spectacularly wrong. It is this profound blind spot in human psychology that when a civilization reaches its absolute peak, the people living inside it just cannot fathom a world where their society doesn't exist anymore. So there's this famous saying, history doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes. And this brilliantly illustrates the whole premise of our investigation today. Because if you look closely at how these historical giants fell, an unsettling and honestly undeniable pattern starts to emerge. They didn't just have a run of bad luck, they followed a very specific sequence of decay. So to understand this, let's dive into the evidence. Case File 1, Rome. 2 million. Just let that sink in. At its peak, the Roman Empire controlled over 2 million square miles of territory. We're talking stretching all the way from the cold rains of Britain right down to the deserts of North Africa. I mean, their roads were absolute engineering marvels. Their laws basically laid the foundation for modern justice, and their armies were completely unmatched. To an everyday citizen of Rome, their society was invincible. But right beneath that surface projection of ultimate strength, major cracks were forming. Wealth was massively concentrating in the hands of a very small elite, while ordinary citizens were sinking into severe poverty. Political leaders shifted their loyalty away from the people and entirely toward protecting their own personal power. And the military, the great source of Roman pride, it devolved into this tool for ambitious generals to just seize control. And corruption, wow, it spread through absolutely every level of government. So poverty and corruption were hollowing out the system long before any enemy ever crossed a border. Which brings us to this profound realization. When the barbarian tribes finally invaded in the 5th century, they weren't chopping down a healthy tree. Actually, it's more like they just gave the final push to a structure that had already been crumbling for decades. Rome was entirely hollow from within. The barbarians were absolutely not the root cause of the fall. They were just the final blow that brought a rotting structure down.
All right, case file 2, the British Empire.
1/4. Think about the sheer massive scale of that fraction for a second. We are jumping centuries forward now, to the empire where it was famously said the sun seemingly never set. Britain built the single largest empire in all of human history. At its zenith, it controlled nearly a quarter of the entire globe. From tiny islands to massive subcontinents, they held it all. And much like Rome, the British Empire appeared to be a completely unstoppable juggernaut of trade, military might, and influence. But let's look past the illusion. On the one hand, you have this image of maintaining a vast, unshakable control over the world. But the actual reality? The cost was devastating. To maintain that empire, colonies were heavily exploited, which grew this deep, seething resentment. Meanwhile, back home, Britain had to fight 2 catastrophic world wars. Those wars fundamentally drained the nation's wealth and completely exhausted its military strength. The empire was basically bleeding out just to keep its grip. The unraveling happened in stages. You go from a century of totally unstoppable global expansion right into the early 20th century where wealth is just drained by global conflict. Eventually, the math simply stopped working. The financial and military cost of holding onto the empire became way greater than the benefit of actually ruling it. And so by the mid-20th century, massive movements for independence rose across India, Africa, and beyond. One by one, colonies broke away, and this once global titan quietly faded into history. Moving on to Case File 3, the Soviet Union. We are now right up in the modern era, examining an empire that collapsed not over centuries, but almost overnight. And this brilliantly illustrates the Soviet paradox. To the outside world, they projected this image of a terrifying, nuclear-armed global superpower, completely capable of rivaling the United States itself. But the internal reality? Decades of severe economic stagnation. Citizens were staring at literally empty store shelves. Rampant corruption was draining away all the resources that were supposed to be meant for the people. The facade of strength was entirely disconnected from the reality on the ground. And because of that immense disconnect, The citizens no longer trusted their leaders at all. I mean, it was a complete breakdown of the social contract. So what happens when a system is completely devoid of internal trust? Well, you get sudden dissolution. When the Soviet government finally loosened its iron grip just a tiny bit in 1991, the republics didn't just politely ask for reform, they broke away immediately. The entire union simply dissolved within a matter of months. Which brings us to the hidden pattern. Okay, now that we have our evidence laid out, let's synthesize what we've learned and reveal the shared DNA of collapse, hidden within these wildly distinct empires. If you look closely at the source material, every single one of these empires followed these exact 4 warning signs. Step 1. Growing economic inequality reaches a breaking point where ordinary people can no longer survive, while a tiny elite hoards all the wealth. Step 2. A complete breakdown of trust between the citizens and their leadership. Step 3. Unsustainable overextension, meaning the empire tries to control and manage way more than it can actually sustain financially or militarily. And Step 4. Internal division completely replaces unity. The nation just turns against itself from within. And the evidence proves the point perfectly. Rome, yes to all 4. Britain, yes to all 4. The USSR, again, yes to all 4. We are talking about 3 completely different eras of human history here. Different technologies, totally different cultures, wildly different systems of government. Yet the exact same 4 fatal symptoms precede their demise every single time. It's wild. Which brings us to the absolute core truth of this explainer. The invaders, the wars, the revolutions, they are never the true cause. They are simply the final event in a story that had already been written long before. Just like a termite-infested house, it isn't the sudden gust of winds that destroys the building, right? The wind just knocks down what was already hollowed out from the inside. And finally, the modern mirror. So let's turn our analytical lens from the past toward the present day. This is perhaps the most vital takeaway from our source material today. History does not warn us with blaring sirens. It doesn't send us an urgent text message. It warns us quietly, in patterns. And the terrifying reality of human nature is that by the time most people finally look around and notice the pattern taking shape, it is usually already too late to stop the momentum. So, I'm going to leave you with a final, honestly, pretty uncomfortable question that history forces all of us to ask. If extreme economic inequality, a complete breakdown of institutional trust, unsustainable overextension, and fierce internal division are the 4 undeniable warning signs that always precede a collapse, are we seeing those same signs in our world today? Take a look around, reflect objectively on the evidence we just unpacked, and ask yourself where we are in the pattern. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning what you see.